Hey Adventures, so today we're going after the starter on this 2004 Toyota Tundra, the 4.7. Guess where the starter is? It's underneath the intake, so that's where we're going. So right now I'm taking off these 10s for this little beauty cover, and then I'm going to get my snoot out of the way here. There's a couple hoses to hold everything on together, some little baby hoses, and then away she goes. The next few steps here is I'm just going over the little brackets and stuff. There's some 10s and 12s to hold some different brackets on. There's connectors I'm snapping off. This bracket in the back, as you can see, sticking up against the firewall. That's important. You don't want to forget about that when you put the intake back on, because the wheel will go underneath the intake and then you don't know where the connector connects in. So this, I'm just pulling off more hoses here just to make more room so this thing can pop up and come out. So over here on the passenger side, you got this fuel pressure regulator hose. You got to pull it off. So then you got these little connectors and stuff. I just undid the 10s, so they just came out of the way. And you're gonna have a whole bunch of random hoses and stuff like that. You just want to make sure you mark them, or you have a really good idea, or you're taking video like I am of where things go, because it's really easy to forget or lose where your things go. Alright, so this is the crossover fuel rail. So this is like a 17, and the 17 on the other side is a banjo, and plus there's like a 10 here on top of the intake. So once I take this off, then you should be able to take the injectors off. You have to get those bolts, but right now I'm pulling the intake throttle plate off, and they're just a couple 12s. Pull those off, and then get this out of the way so it's got more room for the main goal is getting this intake out of here. So with this out of the way, it allows the intake to come up and out. So we're going to move on to the next thing after this. So here's the crossover fuel line for the fuel injectors. So there's a 12 or 10 there, and plus you have the 17 for the banjo bolts. So I'm going to get this out. It's the 12, and then I have to go after the 17, which is the 2 banjo bolts. The fuel line out of the way, you can look at all your connectors and stuff, and you have these brackets. You can push these out of the way, get better access to the bolts for the fuel rail. Those fuel rail bolts are 12s, so get those out of the way. Then we're going to do all our connectors. Make sure the line here on the back that has a hose clamp, I pulled that off so I have better access. So all these here, got a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be sucked up so you don't get anything dropping it down into the engine. So I'm going to suck all this stuff up after I pull this last fuel rail. To undo this fuel line, it's pretty easy. Just press on the buttons there, pops right out. Really easy stuff. Back here over on the driver's side of the engine, there's a couple brackets that are holding different things. There's a couple 10s holding them things on. So just be mindful of those. So looking through here, the Torx bolts are what hold the intake on, or they're 12s, wherever we want to use. And like I said, I was going to suck all this stuff up so I don't have anything pulling the intake. So I'm going to use air-powered vacuums, so there's any fuel vapor, it's not going to blow up. So now I got my ratchet here, and we're going to just break all the bolts loose. Now with everything out of the way, you can see here that I'm lifting. It takes a little bit of back and forth action to pull it up. There is a bracket that you just watched fall down. That's very important for later. The one that's part of the intake that I just pulled up. So it's freeze frame. It's right back here, the one that's hanging there. You want to make sure that that's in the proper place when you put the intake back, or it will stay underneath. So here you have the air pump for the EGR system and stuff, and you have some connectors. I'm going to undo all these connectors. There's a connector here for the starter. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to undo this 3 bolts to hold the secondary air injection pump out. Pull that out. And then there's a tube. We're going to pull the water tube. And once we get the water tube, there's still a few other things we got to take off. There's a crossover pipe for the back for coolant and for the EGR. So we're going to have to take that off. Once we get this out of the way, like I'm just wiggling it here, I've undone some of the clamps. Get this out of the way, they got better access. There's these connectors here for these 2 NOx sensors. You want to disconnect these, make sure they're reconnected when you go back. And Before I go any further, I gotta drain the cooling system so it's down far enough so I don't drop a whole bunch of coolant into my back 2 cylinders. So this crossover pipe here, I gotta take this out, this pipe here, and then I'm gonna undo a bolt that takes this pipe out. So once the pipe's taken out, then I should have better access to get to the bolts. There's 2 bolts on each side, or 2 or 3 bolts on each side of this aluminum piece that cross over from one head to the other. That has to be removed so you can get better access to your starter bolts. There is a gasket. They do make a gasket for it. It's like a coolant crossover pipe gasket, I think is what it's called. So this bracket's loose now. It'll pop right out. There's got to be a coolant mess that happens here. I dab all this up with a sucker. And so I keep the cap on the radiator. So here I have the crossover pipe. It's off, and I've marked these have EGR tube, or they have vacuum tubes on the pipes, so you have to mark those. So now I have perfect access to my bolts for my starter. This 10 is on the starter. It's got to be taken off. These bolts that hold the starter on are 14s. Then there's a 10 that holds a plastic fan on. It doesn't allow you to get the proper connectors off the solenoid, so you have to move that out of the way. But once you get these 2 14s, that will allow your starter to come out. So here is the 10 I was talking about. You gotta get that off there. Once you get that off there, you have perfect access to your 14, and it will come out. Alright, so the starter's in place here. I got all the bolts tight, so it's time to go the other way with it. And like I said, I got new gaskets for these. I didn't get a part number, but the new gaskets in the place for this crossover pipe. You want to make sure that you put everything on that you took off. This special connector for that 10 that I took off. All your knock sensors need to go on in the order they came off. All these tubes need to go on in the order they came off. And once you get that back into place, it's pretty simple to go the other way. So once we go the other way, then we can start it. And here I'm just running through this pretty quickly because I missed some parts because my phone died. But here on the intake, I gave a new gasket. You kind of want to slide it in there. There's a bracket like I've talked about quite a few times now. You want to make sure it's properly hanging out in the back so it doesn't get underneath. If it's underneath, you'll never find where it connects in. So I've got my brand new blue intake gaskets on it. Got it into place. Now here you can look at all the brackets. They need to be lined back up. Put your intake on. Tighten your banjo bolts and your banjo fittings back into place. And you know, it's getting pretty close. The other thing is that you want to make sure when you're all said and done, you want to put coolant in it and let it run, burp the cooling system so that it doesn't get an air pocket somewhere and overheat on you. So I'm also checking for fuel leaks or anything like that. So that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. If you have any questions, please give me a like, give me a subscribe, and tell a friend about it. So thanks for watching.
Fixer good.
Be a fixer. Be your own hero.